Alright, before I get into the video, spoilers ahead. If you're not caught up on the manga, don't watch. I don't know why you would even click on a video about an arc that is clearly not in the anime just from the title alone, but regardless, please leave. You will be spoiled. Alright, on with the video. So not too long ago, My Hero Academia ended what has come to be known as the Paranormal Liberation War arc, and it has had a very mixed reaction overall now that it is over. A mixed reaction that, while I do understand, I do not agree with at all. This is an arc that I thoroughly enjoyed for just about every week it is released, with even its few weaker chapters having plenty of redeeming qualities. That being said, if you did not enjoy it, I don't mind. You have the right to that opinion, and something like enjoyment is as subjective as it gets. However, I am not here to argue something so benign as enjoyment. Instead, I am here to argue against a very specific sentiment that has arisen at several points in this arc, as I feel it misses the point of the arc entirely. And don't worry, I'm not gonna waste your time talking about the early bits of the arc. Pretty much everyone I know has little to no issue with its first half. The thing that a lot of people are taking issue with is the climax, and I say climax in quotes. Because it's not really a climax, is it? In many war arcs, there is some amazing final battle. Hell, that's the case in most arcs in general. But that isn't really the case here. Both sides, heroes and villains, take heavy damage with neither having a clearly decisive victory. I would argue the heroes lost much more in this arc, but that doesn't take away from the fact that the fight doesn't really conclude. It just ends without a conclusion. And I think this has left many feeling unsatisfied because this is not what they expected, and this has happened because Horikoshi has been playing a very deliberate game with his readers. He framed this as a huge climactic battle, while this was in fact a setup arc. That's right, folks. This was all along a setup arc disguised as a war arc, and that is because that's what he had to do for the story to work moving forward. Let me explain it like this. Let's imagine for a moment that this was the big climactic arc we were led to believe it is. I believe that it would very much hurt the series in the long run, and that is because of the relationship between the heroes and the villains. As a concept, the characters in this story work on their own just fine thematically, but just working thematically is not enough for a hero-villain dynamic to be completely effective, and that is because of the heroes, the students that we have followed thus far. Because before this arc, the students have had no stake in this fight other than protecting society as the dutiful heroes they aspire to be. The stakes are just them doing their job, whatever that means to them. Obviously, it is not entirely that simple, but it could be more because they lack a personal dynamic with their villains. Specifically, this arc worked to set up three absolutely vital character dynamics: Deku and Shigaraki, Ochako and Toga, and Todoroki and Dabi. Let's start with Ochako and Toga first, as they are a bit simpler. Before this arc, their dynamic is very one-sided. Toga is a crazy yandere and wants to drink Uradaka's blood. Ooh, creepy villain, Ochako doesn't want anything to do with that. However, between the forest camp arc and this one, she has had several moments where she has come to reevaluate what she wants to do with her career and is no longer in it simply for the money for her parents. Now she has come to feel a responsibility to not only save people, but also the heroes around her. Now thematically, Toga works fine as a villain. Uradaka has developed a sense of desire and duty as a hero, while Toga is given the motivation of wanting to live the easy life because society is too hard on someone like her, with deep mental issues and heavy quirk trauma. Now Toga has lost her best friend, and she is more confused and angry about the society she lives in than ever before. Instead of wanting to support people, she wants a place that fully accepts her regardless of her murderous desires. That is a lot of good character work that was done to set up their fight, but before this arc, Ochako has had zero stakes in fighting her. Obviously, she would detain her if she was the only one available, as her duties as a hero would require, but there is no personal reason until now. Now, because of their conversation, Ochako has a personal connection to Toga. Ochako is the first hero or even normal person to acknowledge that Toga might be suffering as well. They both know how each other feels, at least vaguely, about the current situation, and this will probably lead them to clash again in a way that is interesting to read. But that is not all. Let's talk about Deku and Shigaraki. Now, I'm not gonna go into a whole tirade about their dynamic and parallels. I could talk for half an hour on that and I would still probably have missed something. But it is important to say that, like Toga and Ochako, they have a perfectly thematic hero-villain dynamic. They have paralleled each other's journeys throughout the entire series and have come to represent completely opposite ideals and lifestyles. This works great, but there's a problem. Before this arc, Deku hasn't seen Shigaraki since their encounter at the mall. That was chapter 69, over 200 chapters ago. Let that sink in for a moment. The main character and his main antagonist have not seen each other for over 200 chapters. That is over half the manga. And they have both changed a lot since then. So when they fight, they're fighting for artificial reasons. Deku wants to stop the new coming of All for One because he feels an insane duty to be the one to do it. The moment he engages him in a fight, like Uraraka, it is out of his heroic duty, not a personal connection. He currently has no idea about what Shigaraki's backstory is and what his motivation is, aside from his monologue that only makes sense to us because we have seen the proof of it. Deku has not really. Deku still believes in the system to some extent, so Deku doesn't care about Shigaraki, he just wants to beat him because he has to. But the fight that Deku has with Shigaraki does a great job of establishing an interesting character dynamic between them. During the fight, Shigaraki brutally injures two of Deku's teachers, filling him with such a rage that he exclaims he will never forgive him. And remember, this is right after the arc where Deku tells Todoroki that if Todoroki hated someone, they would just say they'd never forgive them. So we are told through this that Deku now hates Shigaraki in that moment. However, he later sees that Shigaraki is also a victim of All for One's to some extent. He doesn't have the details, but he notices that Shigaraki looks like he needs saving. Now obviously this does not mean that Deku plans to forgive or redeem Shigaraki. The notion is asinine. Instead, this is a conflict being born from Deku's most fundamental character trait. His admiration of All Might despite being quirkless made him grow up with a psychological need to save and help others. Shigaraki's actions made him hate Shigaraki and triggered his need to save people from him, but Shigaraki also triggered that need by virtue of his own victimhood. Now, Deku has a reason to engage Shigaraki in combat outside of them being the next All Might and All for One. The conflict is now above that and far more personal, and this will likely only be more the case if Deku eventually learns about Shigaraki's past. I am not saying that Shigaraki will be redeemed or anything, just that Shigaraki has presented Deku with a moral dilemma that he can't ignore due to his own psychology. Lastly, we have Dabi and Todoroki. This is the easiest one to talk about, because before this arc, Dabi and Todoroki have no known connection. We only had the hints. Now the truth is out in the open and Todoroki has decided to take full responsibility for what has transpired, and it's weird to me that a bunch of people wanted a huge Dabi versus Todoroki fight at this point where Todoroki pops off or something. Despite how it is made explicitly clear that Dabi has stronger fire than Endeavor and Todoroki is at Endeavor's level. He is clearly outmatched in power and is held back by his emotional distress as well. Not only are these holding him back, it would be incredibly lame to have this huge climactic fight before we even reach the final arc, so the fight can't conclude here. And that's the point. None of these three battles really have conclusions. They all end in retreats. And I totally get why this was unsatisfying to people and made them think less of the arc. But what needs to be understood is that this was the point. Horikoshi did not want any of these huge climactic battles. Essentially, in more crude terms, he's blueballing us, giving us a hint of what is to come while also using the opportunity to create more interesting character dynamics to use later. Frankly, it is very impressive that he was able to give us chapter after chapter of impressive action set piece while also having the restraint to hold back and not show everything right away. Because if this was the climax that everyone wanted it to be, then the actual final arc would suck. Like, I know Todoroki is gonna fight Dabi in the end, but I really don't care as much about that confrontation if their whole dynamic is concluded in the same arc it begins. Now we have the scenes of Todoroki in the hospital actually having to think about what this fight means for him and having to make the explicit decision on what he has to do. That is a lot more interesting than having Todoroki go crazy in this arc. As for Deku and Shigaraki, the story goes out of its way to show us that they are both incomplete vessels of the immense power they hold, and therefore neither of them are ready for the positions they want to have in society. Their clash will come again, and it will be far more intense and action-packed than anything we have seen in the series thus far, because Horikoshi is taking the time to build up to that point. And with that, I hope I got across why I think this arc is so good. It's a transition arc into the next saga of the story. It didn't end how a lot of people wanted it to, but it did give us a lot of setup for some really interesting plot lines. And now that the war is over, we get to watch the crumbling of society. Of course, hero society isn't gonna go up in flames overnight. We are instead being shown the slow process of villains wreaking havoc and people trying to defend themselves as the hero system slowly falls apart. Obviously, the arc isn't perfect. I think the Mirio reveal could have been handled better or even saved for a later time, for example. But things like that are nitpicks compared to what Horikoshi was able to accomplish in this arc. He effectively moved the story into its next stage, giving many characters the direction that their journey will now have as the world around them changes irreparably. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. I haven't made an MHA video in a bit, so this was kind of fun to talk about, and I've had these thoughts swirling around in my brain for quite a while, to be honest. If you did like the video, please make sure to like and subscribe to see more stuff like it, or just because you're feeling nice today. Regardless, take care, and I hope to see you around.